So without any further ado, I am super excited to welcome the generous, because we had a presenter that had a life challenge and had to drop out the last minute, and courageous because she said yes to Missy and I, Sarah Thurber, who is here to present Innovators versus the Organization. If that is not the next superhero movie, I don't know what. Like it's gotta be. It really has to be. So Sarah, you have control of the screen.
Thank you, Beth. Thanks so much for inviting me. I think it's very courageous of you actually to bring me in. And hello to all the folks that I know and recognize and love. And I'm so glad to be attending CPSI, even if it's virtual. And I thought, just for those of you who are new to CPSI and wonder what this thing kind of is, I would tell you my origin story, because I came to CPSI 30 years ago almost, because I fell in love with the science of creativity on a blind date. And this true story, I was set up on a blind date by a guy who took me out on my 30th birthday. He was a fiance of a friend of mine. He said, there's a guy you have to meet, tall, dark, handsome, and he has a master of science in creativity. And I was like, well, I'm all in on the tall, dark, handsome, but the master of science and creativity, I'm just not sure. But then I met him and I was all in on the master of science and creativity too. And things went well. And I met his parents and that was great. And I was like, we are on a path. And then he said, I need to introduce you to this conference. And I was like, what? Like, wait, I've met your parents. Like, what do you mean I have to meet your conference? And he's like, no, really, you'll see. So he takes me to CPSI in 1994, I think. And I show up and I'm trotted around to like meet the conference. And at the beginning, I was like, why would I be meeting a conference of people who are studying how to think creatively? Like, that's neat, but like, why is that a bar for having a relationship? And by the end of the week, I sort of realized that what was happening at CPSI it was a community of people who are learning to be creative, learning to embody that, which is a much higher and different and more subtle thing. And I just want to say, I've always appreciated CPSI for that. It is really unique that way. And the people who are running it and the wings, you know, they certainly produce programming that helps us learn to think creatively with the cognitive, rational, semantic stuff that we do. And I'm about to present research, all good. And it is really special that this is a group that understands the importance of being as well. So just a love note before we start. So really, I'm here to switch gears and talk to you about cognitive, rational, semantic things for a while. Specifically research that we did, that I conducted with Janice Francisco, who many of you know, who is part of Bridgepoint Effect. Fern, you were at Health Canada. Did you meet Janice as part of your work?
She's been a consultant, a facilitator consultant.
Right.
I know her through the IAF, the International Association of Facilitators.
Great. Well, when I heard you say that you were with Health Canada, I was like, I bet that's somebody who knows Janice. So Janice introduced us to this conference, the Innovators Conference, Innovator with an 8. And this is a conference of folks who work primarily in corporate innovation, either in the organization or consulting with the organization. And they travel around the world hosting these big events. And Janice said, we've got to go. Let's go together. Let's do this. So of course, one thing led to another. And we had the idea, what if we gave the Foresight assessment to all of the people who are registering for this conference? Because that's a particular slice of people. What would we find? And so we started by going to the conference, the Innovator Conference in Tel Aviv. And this is, you know, after all these great presentations of innovations and all this excitement about innovations and all these innovators being together, the subtext of a lot of it was innovation in organizations isn't working that well. And this in the Harvard Business Review, July 22nd, 2019, according to a report from Capgemini, the vast majority of innovation labs, up to 90%, one expert says, failed to deliver on their promise. That's innovation labs. There are also innovation other initiatives, but innovation really struggles in organizations. And the question is why? You have all these innovators who are so excited about the work they do. And the recurring theme in this conference was our idea was amazing, but finance wouldn't fund it, or engineering just wouldn't build it. They kept blocking us, or sales said they didn't think they could sell it. So there was a lot of resistance to these new ideas, even though the enthusiasm, the unbridled enthusiasm of the people at this conference, who were technically the innovators, was unmistakable. And I think it's interesting because innovation to work, for innovation to work, you have to understand it's different, but linked to creativity. Creativity is the ability to bring something new into the world, something new and valuable into the world. That's often done with an individual or a small group of individuals. Innovation is a team sport. Innovation, especially in large organizations, has to touch on teams across the organization. It's a cross-functional, multifunctional phenomenon, and it really has to work all the way across. And yet this was the messaging that we kept hearing. We heard one guy in Atlanta spend a whole session talking about how innovators needed to learn to talk to the CFO because they kept messaging the thing wrong. They kept turning the CEO, away from their passion projects because they were so passionate about them. And all these innovators were sort of scratching their head thinking, why is this happening? So here's a question for you. In Slack, or not in Slack, in chat, I knew it was like a less short word with an A in the middle. In chat, could you please, one at a time, we're gonna all do this together, write just adjectives that come to your mind when you think of, and we'll just do this one at a time, so don't do it yet. So first we're gonna do like, what adjectives come into your mind when you think of a finance person? Now we're asking sort of generically and stereotypically because thank goodness, not all finance people are alike or anybody's alike, but thinking generically in chat, will you please just write adjectives, good, bad, otherwise, neutral, whatever, that come to mind when you're thinking of finance person. Rigid, ROI focused, numbers oriented, tight, detailed, risk averse, organized, structured, analytical. Great. And some of these are stingy. Some of these have a little negative tinge. Some of them are really positive. Terrific. Okay. So that's the finance person. How about what are the characteristics that you think of when you think of a salesperson? Like, now try that one on. Who's a salesperson? What are the great things about them? What are the annoying things about them? Like, what are the things that come to mind when you think of that? Amiable, superficial, enthusiastic, in your face, storyteller, commission driven, extrovert, talker, fluff, smarmy, convincing. All right, super good. You guys are great at this. Tricky. Okay. Passing again with flying colors. Now your job is to think of the engineer. When you think of an engineer, again, characteristics that embody the stereotypical engineer, good, bad, we're not slanting this one way or the other. Problem solver, super smart, scientific, daughter, pocket full of pens, technical, analytical, devoid of all human motion. Okay, quiet but deep, grids, math oriented. Okay, this is great. So you can see like these people are very different from one another already. We've made some very clear distinctions that we just have in our head. These are these people. Okay, now your big chance. How would you describe innovators? What are they like? Creative, open, crazy, kooky, experimental, excited, non-linear, ask what if, fun, unique, great, questioner, success drive. Okay, you guys are fabulous at this. And here's the thing, you are completely on target with the research. You know, aside from whether I think you're right or not, you are actually lining up really squarely with the research. And you're also lining up with the cartoon world. This was a this was a really funny little comic strip that that Janice Francisco pulled. She was like, you know what? This explains so much about why organizations struggle with cross-functional stuff. How do you define your product? Well, your R&D department is defining it. It's a full-fat yogurt in a 2.25 ounce tube. And your agency is like, it's a benign rebellion. Oh my gosh. You know, I mean, everybody has such a different take on the work they're doing and why it's important and what is important about it. And that's what we're up against with innovation. If what we're saying is that innovation is a team sport and requires everyone in all the functions in the organizations to play, this is a challenge that we've got to bring all of these people together and talk in a language that everyone understands. So the obvious upshot is people solve problems differently, right? Then the question is that because of their job, or is something else at play here? Is there some other way to understand why people have such a different take on the same thing? In that case, like a tube of yogurt. Like, what is really going on? So I run the company, the Foresight Thinking Profile, and you know the guy that I was set up with on the blind date. Well, I married him, and his name is Blair Miller, and I'm still married to him, and he's great. And after a while, I started writing books on creativity, and I got my own Master of Science degree in creativity. And then Blair, being rather competitive, got a PhD in creativity. Okay, that's fine. But the good news is some of the research that he did in that dissertation, we're going to see in this report. So one of the questions that he asked when he was doing his dissertation is the phenomenon of thinking preferences, which is what we measure, showing up in careers? So let me back up a little bit and tell you about Foresight if you don't know about it. Foresight is a problem-solving system that starts with an assessment, and the assessment measures how you like to approach a complex problem. We use it at CPSI because the fundamental problem-solving system that we're describing is creative problem solving. So it reveals how you approach creative problem solving. But in the larger world where not everyone knows those terms, we say it reveals how you like to approach a complex problem. So an important thing to know is that Foresight is not measuring skill, like how good you are at problem solving. It's measuring what you like best, where your energy goes in the problem solving process, where you likely grab on first in the problem solving process. And so since I run Foresight and I think and breathe and even live in Foresight terms all the time, I'm thinking, wow, what if we could understand the challenge that innovators have in organizations through the lens of Foresight? Is that a thing? Would that help us understand why some of these communications are breaking down and why the finance people aren't listening to the innovators and the salespeople are not sure? Like, what would happen if we looked at the whole thing through that lens? So again, for those who are just catching on to this whole lingo, the creative problem solving process, and this is actually research from Gerard Puccio, who authored the Foresight assessment, who recognized that there really are 4 types of thinking that go into every complex problem solving process, whether it's design thinking or lean or Six Sigma, or, you know, that there are loads of problem solving processes, all good, and many of them expert models for what they do. But if you boil it all down, you can identify 4 really distinct types of thinking. And they are: clarify, where you're understanding the problem; ideate, where you're coming up with ideas for how you could solve the problem; develop, where you are working out solutions so that those ideas could become manifest; and implement, where you're selling and pushing and moving the ideas into the world. So obviously, when you look at, you know, complex problem solving and creative problem solving from this perspective, you see that creativity isn't one kind of thinking. It requires 4 very different kinds of thinking. And that's cool. We can learn what they are. We can learn tools to do them better. But here's the other piece of research that Dr. Puccio at Foresight discovered. People have thinking preferences. We all like some more than others. 50% of people like one of those types of thinking over all the others. Some have combination scores, but like the phenomenon of thinking is not even. We do it differently, and we do it differently in a way that is completely subconscious, like not conscious. So let's do a thinking experiment. I think I can see almost everybody's face on my screen. And so if you can see me, you need to see me for this one because it's very visually oriented. So I am currently carrying a can of spray paint. Who knew? And I'm going to throw it to you across the magic of the interwebs, and you're going to catch it, and you're going to spray paint your initials in really big letters in front of you, and then you're going to clap your hands. Got that? I got the spray paint. I'm throwing it to you. Spray paint your initials in big letters. Clap your hands when you're done. Okay. Okay, good. Okay, good. So that was not the experiment. You did great on that part, but the experiment is this. Now I want you to raise your hand if you just wrote those initials with the hand that you usually write with. Did you just do that with the hand you usually write with? And did anyone do it with the other hand? Sometimes that happens, which is fine. And if I'd said, hey, write your initials with the hand you don't usually write with, you could have done that too, right? And that's a phenomenon we know, right? I say, write this down. You grab the pen or you write in the with your graffiti spray paint can with the hand you usually write with. And that's a phenomenon called handedness, right? But there's a similar phenomenon that goes on in your brain when someone confronts you with a complex problem. They really should call it mindedness, but they haven't really gotten there yet. But what happens is you grab onto the problem with the kind of thinking you like best, the kind of thinking you are unconsciously most comfortable with. So I might grab onto the problem with clarifying and start understanding the information, asking questions and getting clear on what the background is and understanding all the aspects of what we know now. And that would work, right? There's no harm in starting the problem there. You can solve a problem from anywhere. But if Liz Monroe Cook grabs onto that same problem as an ideator, she's going to want to explore all the possibilities and all the things that might happen. And wow, what if we turned it upside down and made it blue? And I'm going to start looking at her like, Liz, what vitamins are you taking? Like, you must be out of your mind. That's not the way to solve a problem. And, then you have people who are implementing instead of doing clarifying. And that's where the problem arises. It arises in small teams, in relationships, and in any group of people who's trying to solve a complex problem together. People will naturally approach it through their preferences, the way they do, just like they grab a pen with the hand they always use. They don't think about it. It's not even a conscious act. That's just how we start. And we'll get through it in our own way. But anybody who's actually made it to a conference like this is a successful problem solver. So your way works, right? So you still can't imagine, like, why are these people still doing it a different way than I am doing it? They must be crazy, but they're just doing it in their own success path. And you can measure that with the Foresight thinking profile. And that's what's really cool about it. So this is what the Foresight thinking profile looks like when you get your actual results. And I'm showing this because this will help us understand the research that I'm going to show you in a minute. So in any Foresight individual profile, you'll see 4 different numbers, and they are your score that you did for your self-assessment to show what kind of preference you have, again, not ability, but preference you have for clarifying, for ideating, for developing, and for implementing. So we can measure your preference scientifically in a valid research measure to show how you score. Now the score doesn't end up being too important. The thing that ends up being important here is the line, is the wave of where your energy goes up and goes down. That's the most useful piece of information, I think, on this page, where you can see, wow, when this person is clarifying, which is the blue dot on the left, they're going to have a lot of energy. And that gray bar, we call that the neutral zone. Anything in the gray bar means neutral, but anything above it means that's a high preference. And anything below it means that's a low preference. So you can see this person, high preference for clarifying, but then the energy drops off at ideating, rises up again for developing, and drops kind of low as a low preference for implementation. Any questions about what we're measuring there? That makes sense? Okay, so here's what's kind of cool. This is a phenomenon that's universal. It happens around the world. It happens in all countries, across ages. You know, it is like-handedness. It is that universal. And there are 15 possible combinations of scores. You can be a single clarifier or ideator or developer or implementer, but you can also be a combination. About 20% of people have two high preferences. Only 5% have 3 high preferences. And then there's a group of about 18%, 20% who are pretty even across, and they behave in their own different way related to problem solving. So I would be curious. I mean, raise your hand if you know your preference. Okay, good. And so I would be curious, for those of you who know, go ahead and write that if you'd be willing to in chat. But for those of you who are new to this, I'd be curious to know if you could sort of guess what your highest preference or your lowest preference might be. So clarify is when you're studying information, getting the facts, learning the research, asking all the questions so that you understand the playing field really well, and you can really isolate the right problem to solve. Ideating, super matching new connections, building on other people's ideas, looking for things that have never been done, really interested in novelty, imagination. It's a very different kind of thinking. Develop, I bet you're gonna be able to guess who's this. Working out the idea, carefully, meticulously detailed, making the idea real, and implementing, pushing to make the result happen. Okay, so the research that we've found, thanks to Gerard Puccio and Blair Miller, both PhDs in creativity and creative problem solving, is this: that creative problem solving requires 4 kinds of thinking, that people have thinking preferences, and so do teams, and so do job functions, and so do whole organizations. And that phenomenon is really interesting and is where managing innovation through the lens of thinking preference becomes really interesting, because how you approach a problem really depends on thinking preferences. Okay, so here's your quiz. I'm going to have you guess in chat again, who do you think matches whom? Okay, for innovation, for the innovation department, we did this research. What do you think their highest preference was? Don't be shy. And I am looking in chat right now. Ideating, we have a strong bent for ideating. I'd say ideating is the general vote on that. All right, I'm not telling you yet. What about finance? What do you think the high preference for people in finance might be? Clarify, clarify, develop, clarify, clarify. I'm getting a strong clarifying vibe from these chat messages. Okay. What about engineering? Develop, develop, implement. And remember, we're talking about groups of people. My son's an engineer and he's an ideator. And I told him, but you know, we're not stereotyping people. We're just looking at the research. Okay, develop and implement. Great. You guys are right on it. And then what about sales? What do you think is the predominant preference for sales? Implement. Okay, you guys are so good. So this is what we found. This is what the research shows. It shows that you were right, which of course is what we're always hoping for, but you were right. Innovators, people in the innovation department have a strong attraction, strong preference for ideating. People in finance have a strong preference for clarifying and also for developing. You see that, but they have a low preference for ideating. Engineers have kind of a split preference. Somebody said this exactly so. High preference for developing and also for clarifying. And then sales, straight implementing. So you guys are fabulous. And let me show you, the next slide is kind of the super researchy slide. And this is Blair's work. This is the Z-score, not the straight raw score from 9 to 45, which you have on a personal profile, but the Z-score for all these different functions. And I know it's great, so I'm going to read you what some of them are. This is consulting, advertising, finance, operations, quality, HR, engineering, design, IT, purchasing, and sales. What you'll notice is the N, like the number of people that this represents, is in the hundreds or in the thousands. We took our whole database and crunched these numbers for people who responded, which was an optional voluntary response, who then took the assessment. So these are correlations that we know from self-reported data. Very cool. But what we don't know is, what about innovators? And you can see these are really different. Like these are similar, but they're really opposite from the others. So we're going to unpack some of that. But before we do, let me just explain again, these 4 points represent clarify, ideate, develop, and implement. And the 0 means average. Like that's sort of like the neutral zone in this Z-score thing. Let me just cop to the fact that I am sort of out of my depth on super technical statistical stuff. So if someone has questions, I would love to take them. And if I don't know the answer, I will find you the answer, but I'm not going to posture as a statistical wizard. Okay. So we didn't know who the innovators were. And going to this conference, this innovator conference, seemed like a potentially really interesting place to find out. So we followed the Innovator Conference in 2018 from country to country, city to city, continent to continent. We traveled on 4 continents to 6 different cities and got foresight profiles from more than 400 corporate innovators. And then, just to be sure we were giving you really good data, because we like data, we actually compared those to the 11 functions that you just saw. And we took a baseline snapshot of the profiles, the other profiles that were taken during that same time period, which were 13,500 other profiles were happening during that, just to be sure that we didn't have some kind of burp in the system and everybody ended up being that year. Like, we wanted to make sure that the phenomenon we were seeing when we were measuring our innovators was truly that. So here's what the 13,500 profiles look like. See that 0? These are Z-scores again. See that 0? They're just skimming right along the 0 line. That's what we're hoping to see. So what we're suggesting is, in general, this is measuring what it says it's going to measure, and there's no bias. There's nothing way off. That's our control population. So the next slide shows you what the innovator profile looked like by comparison. There it is, a little extreme. The blue line is the innovator profile. The clarifier is below the 0 mark, meaning low preference for clarifying. Again, in general, not everybody, but in general, low preference for clarifying, very high preference by comparison for ideating, below normal, like again, low preference for developing, and, healthy high to middling preference for implementation. So what you're seeing there is you're seeing a high ideator. That is in Foresight language, somebody who is a single peak preference. So what we know about ideators is they fall in love with their own ideas. They get super excited about their own ideas, and this is how they try to sell their ideas. This idea is amazing, and like exclamation points and colors. I would have put emojis in here, but you know what? I didn't have emojis. I couldn't find them because it was in PowerPoint. But you know, ideators like to talk about ideas, and they assume other people like to talk about ideas. They are excited about raw ideas that haven't really been ironed out or sort of drained of their life yet. They're still spontaneous and new. They like ideas that they're passionate about, ideas that inspire them, ideas that can make a better world, ideas that transform things. These are the things that really speak to the ideator. And yay us, you know, we like to paint the big picture, and it is more fun than a picnic for an ideator to talk to another ideator and share that enthusiasm and have it reflected back. Great thing, one of the great things in the world. Here's the downside. Not everybody has the same response to that total enthusiasm for ideation. If you look at how ideators fit with these other profiles, the ideator is really pronounced in ideation. That's what they like. So what I did was I tried to sort of blank out the profiles that are like that. And this is what we have in that same series. Other functions that really like ideations include consulting, advertising, design. But if you think about it, a lot of times consultants and advertisers and designers are coming from outside the organization because they don't really like to be in an organization. Like they tend to thrive out and come in. So the innovators are really in there kind of on their own. The only people who are not reflected in this, but who are also high ideators are executives, top executives, who tend to be big picture people, who tend to have to keep their eye on the vision ahead and have to inspire people with their ideas. But, you know, unless, you know, so many of the company originators, you think of Steve Jobs, you think of the guy who invented Bose, you know, they were the head of their company. They were the executive company of their company, and they came up with the ideas, and who was to stop them from making those ideas? But in the company, once the company is established, this is what innovators are up against. They are up against people who are not high ideators. They're up against people in finance. Now, this is the 0 mark. Can you see that? That's their ideator score. It's negative 0.2. Like, that's a low ideator score. And this is negative 0.05. And quality is negative 0.3. I mean, these are people who really don't love ideation. And when you don't love it, it's not like you don't love salt, so you don't put it on your food. You resist it. You push back from it. There's research from Ashley Goodwin who studied, like, who do people like to work with? And she found that clarifiers really like to work with other clarifiers. And they tolerate developers all right too. And that developers like to work with developers, and they're okay with clarifiers. And implementers really only like to work with implementers because everyone else is too slow. But ideators like to work with everyone, but no one likes to work with them. So this is what you're dealing with in an organization. I mean, this is the research, right? And the good news is there's definitely a way to work through it. Once this research is surfaced, once people actually understand this is the challenge, you can start using the research for good. You can start using the research to figure out, okay, how are we going to get through? Because innovation is a good thing. Innovation helps companies survive things like, you know, COVID-19. You were just saying about Health Canada, how many innovations came through during that period. I mean, that's what's helped us survive. So here's what we know about when you communicate across preference. This is what people need. Clarifiers need order and the facts and an understanding of history and access to information. They need permission to ask questions. Like, they are really uncomfortable and they feel irresponsible. It's not just uncomfortable, they feel irresponsible if they start pushing into a problem without knowing the information. Ideators, they don't need that. They don't need that at all if they're low clarifiers. They need room to be playful and think of new things. They like a whiteboard. They like variety and change. They like the challenge of something new. And they need the big picture in order to even get into the details. Developers, the engineers of our group, they need time, because what they're working on is they're taking an idea and moving it into its components, and they're working out every single component so that the thing will work when it goes live. That takes time, and it takes a lot of tolerance for detail, but also novelty, because they're creating a new solution. And implementers, they need to do something, and they need to feel like you're doing something, and they need to feel like things are moving ahead. Otherwise, they really lose gas. Okay, so this is where you guys are going to be doing something, because we are setting up now for a breakout room. So this is where you have to really tune in and understand that probably the most usable piece of research here is this slide, which shows that, ideators, we talked about what they like to talk about, their amazing ideas, their raw ideas that haven't been thought through, things they're passionate, idealistic about, how they can transform things by doing something new and different, their vision for the future, the big picture. That's what they love. That's what they want to talk about. But as soon as they get out of the ideator offices in their corporation, that's not what anyone else wants to really talk about. So what it turns out that clarifiers want to talk about is, what's the problem your idea is solving? Like, who's your target audience? And how does it fit with the corporate strategy? What's the precedent? What have we seen that you've done, something like what you've done that's worked? How is there any proof that this is going to work? Have you done your research? Are you organized? Are you coming in with papers all over the place? Or are you coming in just, with your shirt untucked? I mean, this will get you a bad evaluation. And really, have you thought the idea through? Because if you haven't done those things, if you don't have answers to those questions, it's kind of insulting to a clarifier. They're like, why are you here spouting your excitement about this idea that isn't even on target, that isn't even something we should be funding? You probably, as an innovator, could answer these questions if you thought they were that interesting. But what I'm telling you is, they're that interesting if you're talking to somebody who's a clarifier. And if you're talking to someone who's a developer, they're going to want to know. And this happens with our coding team, with our IT team, because IT folks have a similar profile to engineers. IT and engineers, they want to know how your ideas fit into the existing systems, not the existing strategies, but the existing systems of how we get work done. Like, wait, you're going to come up with that? We don't have, we can't even make that happen. So how does it fit with the existing systems, your specific measurable criteria for success? Because developers like to work on spec. They want to know what the specifications are for a successful outcome. And if you haven't done that work, they can't do their work. They're not going to guess. They're not comfortable with the same sort of open-ended ideator, like, I don't know, let's just explore and we'll know it when we see it. Like, no, not a good way to work with a developer. They really appreciate a granular level of detail, because that's what they're going to have to get to. They're going to have to produce work that holds up and is repeatable over time. And they like to know your plans and deadlines. Implementers, again, different. And implementers are also at the top of the organization. Executives and leaders are often have a high implementer profile, as we see. They want to know the bottom line. You know, of course, they want to know the bottom line. They want to know what needs to be done by when, you know, what would you be doing? What are the deadlines and how do we test it fast? But ultimately, they want to know, like, what's the result and why would we do this? How's this going to, what are the benefits, you know, and be fast about that. So same ideator, same innovator with the same idea has to approach these audiences in a really, really different way. So here's my challenge to you. I want everybody, if they have a phone, I hope you have a phone, take a picture of this slide because we're sending you into breakout rooms where you get to do the following. Little breakout rooms of like 3 people. One person is the innovator and is going to be selling an idea. You work at a bicycle company and you're in the innovation department and you're trying to sell the idea of a flying bike. It's an awesome idea. And you have reason to believe you could make this work. So one of the people in the breakout room is the seller, and the seller is the ideator innovator. The other player in the room is, or if there are 2 of you, the other 2 people are buyers. And what your challenge is pick one preference, developer, clarifier, or implementer, and act that out. And I'll give you 3 minutes for the innovator to try to sell the idea of a flying bicycle. And at first, innovators, I want you to be like, woo, you know, sell it like an ideator. And then as you start to hear the kind of questions and pushback you're getting, try to sell it more appropriately to the people you think are in the room. Does that make sense?
Sarah, can you go back a slide so they can see that one also?
Of course.
And this is for 3 minutes.
3 minutes. You think you can do it in 3 minutes?
I've got confidence in this crowd.
We can do it in 3 minutes.
All right.
We'll give it a shot.
Are you ready?
All right. So your job, if you choose to accept it, is to go in, pick an ideator, pick an innovator who's going to sell the idea, and the other people in the room are buying it. Don't tell anyone what you're in your mind as a seller, who you're acting out, but act that out and see what happens. And ideators, give your ideator thing a shot. Like really go for the ideator thing for a little bit, but eventually you do want to cave to sort of pivot. I'd say after about 30 seconds of trying your best ideator energy, start to pivot. And let's say we, you know, be open to this idea, everybody, all you buyers, be open, but don't be pushovers either. Let's see what happens.
All right.
Beth, you want to send us on our way?
Bye. You're in groups of 2 or 3.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm just curious if any companies are making flying bikes now. Anybody, any luck?
There's probably someone working on it. I know.
Somebody would have done it. So I am very curious, and I would love to hear from a couple of different groups, like, how did that go? What was that? What was your experience?
Oh my gosh, I
Sarah.
had so much fun. We immediately fell into roles, and it was so clear what our roles were. And I loved my group. We were fabulous. So, and hey, innovator, you were terrific, and so was a developer.
And you were able to sort of hold your own with the different groups. That's so great. Did other groups have a similar experience or a different experience?
This was like instant expert.
Yeah.
But you do. You invent solutions on the spot. God bless Marcy. Uh,
So Sarah, since so much of my work is every day working with other R&D people, I just found myself, even though I'm an ideator, going into some other roles and asking the questions that I always hear at all those other meetings that I am part of and attending. You know,
What was that like for you, Claire?
I was trying not to be creative in the questions and stick to those types of questions that come from either mostly the clarifier, like, you know, clarifying what has been done. Do you have a model? Has the prototype been built? You know, those kinds of questions. So that was kind of a challenge for me because I'm not a clarifier. I score very low on clarifying, and actually I score low on implementing too. So it was kind of fun just to be in that space.
That's so cool.
I was going to say that I was, my innovator did a wonderful job, and I took on the role as clarifier, and partly I did because I'm a hardcore like innovator, but I've learned over the years that I have to walk into an innovator discussion having pretended in my prep to be a clarifier so that I'm ahead of all the questions that I know they're going to ask. And so I'm a reluctant clarifier, but have become pretty good at it. I don't like it, but I know it. And so I picked that role because, and in retrospect, I'd wish I'd picked another role that was more out of my comfort zone.
That's so cool. Anyone else? I can't really see hands, so just pop in and.
Yeah, the tension of kind of talking across, either having to pull yourself back and pull, you know, as an ideator, my enthusiasm is, you know, a strength and the downfall at the same time. So that realization, oh, okay, they're not with me. So just making sure, Claire, to your point, going into situations where you're anticipating what they're going to ask, trying not to be dismissive or antagonized. So one of the things I love most about this system is realizing that the people have preferences that I don't have at all, are not I'm not in conflict with them. I need them. Otherwise I'd sit in ideas forever.
Yeah, Yadina was great and she was enthusiastic, but I can see, and she remained that way and she remained happy and to clarify, but I can see how it could be construed as, why is this person putting my idea down, or why are they questioning me, or, you know, just getting upset and irritated with the other person.
I think, Sarah, that's the beauty of using foresight, is you're essentially creating a space of acceptance for all these multiple things that makes it easier to not be defensive when you're confronted with a different style. And I found it easy with Laura to just get more enthused about her questions at every point, because I was thinking, yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, that's a good one. So it's kind of like the ideator's version of excitement can be channeled into what's cool about this person or this preference, you know?
Okay, so I would love to challenge you guys to go back into your rooms and switch roles. Have somebody else take on the role, and then you take on roles that they don't know what you're taking on, and try it again for 3 minutes. Would that be, would you be willing to give that an experiment? Okay. Beth, I turn it over to you. You have the master controls. 3 minutes again, and we'll see you on the other side. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. So I'm very curious, like, how was round 2? Was that different? Was that other insights that came up? Kelsey, you look like you're nodding. Did you have something?
Yeah, I was ideator first round, and then Thomas was our second ideator. He did a really good job not falling into the traps me as the initial ideator fell into, because he knew how we were gonna play, and so he did a really good job. So in my role, I was like, oh, how do I want to ask this? And also, because you're playing the role that you wouldn't normally be in potentially, I'm like, I feel rude. Like I feel like it reminds me of colleagues of mine. I'm like, oh, I'm being such a, insert their name here. But yeah, no, my team did a great job.
So what was interesting is I was the implementer there, and I actually asked poor Doug as the seller there, can I bring the buyer Walmart tomorrow to the lab to see it run? Could you have a working prototype tomorrow?
I was in that group as well, and Doug did a really nice job in a very understated way, because I was beating him up on pricing, and Walmart is not exactly a place that provides a lot of revenue. They always try to beat you down on price, but I thought Doug did a really nice job just maintaining his composure when Claire and I were going after him.
Yeah, that was another way of feeling out of yourself, but I certainly have heard like, well, the buyer's coming next week. Do you have anything for him?
For me, as the ideator this time, it was really fun, and Liz did a great job of being Liz, I think you were a developer. I'm not sure, but that's what I think you were. And it was fine, but I kept thinking, if this was a real situation with an idea that I was really invested in, then the line of questioning that Liz was doing, I would have had to struggle harder not to get defensive, right? Like this was, the flying bike's a cool idea. I love it. I wish it were here, but it wasn't my baby that I sweated, blood to make it happen, right? So I had the freedom not to get defensive.
It's so interesting because you realize that everybody in the room is really trying to fight the good fight on behalf of the organization. They're really trying to be sure that it lands well. And the clarifiers are really trying to make sure that we don't do something harebrained and off strategy. And the developers are really trying to make sure that we can make something that we can actually make, and it can be of quality, and that we can do it, and sell it. And the implementers really want it done and to have a change. But as soon as you latch onto you being right, it is tricky. And Laura, to your point, when it's hard to separate yourself from the idea, it's much harder to listen for cues of, I'm speaking to a clarifier and I probably want to understand this is their natural line of questioning, and I want to really meet them where they are. It's just a really interesting point. Other folks, you guys did such a good job at this exercise. I have to tell you, it's so fun to hear the reports back. All right. Well, I actually would love to open this up now to questions, to really the question, how might we support ideators and innovators in organizations who want to bring amazing ideas and new ways of doing things, and may not have the support in the organization, but may also need coaching on how to get allies on teams across the organization to do it. Like, what would be success strategies, do you think, based on what this research is showing? Laura.
I mean, I've done this a bit grassroots for myself, and now I'm an independent consultant. So this has helped me. And literally in the beginning, I role play, right? I pretend I'm a clarifier. I pretend and I before I go into meetings, and I think about what's the developer going to ask me, and I get ahead of it, right? And we talk in earlier sessions about empathy. It's as much about having empathy with the other kinds of thinkers, right? And the more you develop that empathy, the better you're able to listen to them. And the more you pre-think, once you've got yourself in their shoes and you pre-think what they might ask, then you don't get blindsided when you're actually having the conversation.
Sarah, I have a question. So it's really not about, well, it is about foresight, but in a different way. So what do you do in the situation where a team or group is actually, a research and development group is being given the job of being innovator, to be more innovative, to actually to increase the amount of new and different thinking that is coming out of their lab space? And that feels very weird to them because for 20 years, they were working in certain processes that they became very comfortable with, that they know frontwards and backwards and sideways. And all of that doesn't seem to fit the process that they know, or the way they've been introduced into the organization or into the labs of this is how we do things. Now we're being asked to be innovative and throw some of those processes out the window. What do we do?
$6 million question. Actually, probably in this stage, like $6 billion question.
Well,
right
yes,
there.
and those actually are the questions that the people that I work with face. It's not a set innovation team, and it's not a set innovator. It is these groups of people representing different brands and different functions have been now asked to broaden their scope and broaden their thinking and approach, and they keep on saying the word design thinking like that's magic, and to approach things in different ways. And so, yes, I can see, and I know many of them personally, and I can see many of them, oh yeah, they're clarifiers, they're developers. It's R&D, research and development. That's who they hire. So that's most of the organization. So sometimes I'm like, I don't know how to ask the questions where they will not feel defeated, or they have to explain to me the process one more time. Because I've heard about the processes many times, where I'm just trying to really just kind of stretch a little bit or make them go down a direction a little bit more.
I was at a dinner party once. This isn't an answer, but it's sort of it's part of the conversation, I think. I was at a dinner party once, and I'd just written my book, and it was 2016, and I was standing in line with a guy who was the head of a hospital system, the medical director of one of the big hospital systems in Chicago. And so we were chatting, and then he asked me what I did, and I was like, well, this is either going to go really well or we're not going to have dinner together. And I told him I just published a book on creative thinking, and he was like, really? I mean, just leaned right in. He just sat me down, and we ate dinner, had the whole dinner together. He said, I have access to, I run the lab, the R&D lab, and I have access to the brightest brains in the world. Like, people send me resumes of students who have perfect scores and perfect recommendations and, summa cum laude performance in school. And a lot of them come to the lab and are completely at a loss. Like, they just do not know how to function. They do not know how to function in a setting where they're asked to create ambiguity, to wander into ambiguity, to sort of play with the unknown, to work on a problem that clearly does not have a solution. That's why we're working on it. It's so foreign to the way they've been schooled and trained. But the great thing about those people is they are really good students. Those are people who are good learners. And if there is a way to give them access to learning in a different way, dimes to donuts, they could probably pick up a sufficient amount to really make a difference in their idea production, to really make a difference in the way they work on ideas and the way they hear ideas. When you do foresight with a group, sometimes there's an implementer in the group who is like, oh, I'm an implementer. Oh, and they hang their heads like, I don't do process. And I was like, hey, you're an implementer. Here's the good news about implementers. They like doing things. And now that there's a process, you need to put clarifying on your to-do list, and you need to put ideating on your to-do list. no matter what your original preference, the beauty of the system is that it is not a capacity system. It is a preference system. It just reveals to you, hey, you know what? Given somebody putting you under pressure, like, hey, write your name in the air really fast, you're not going to even step back and think, how should I be thinking? You know, you're going to do what you always do. And I don't know if I'm sure you've had more experience than I have, Clara, working to perhaps train people in the R&D to do that.
Well, it is, and it's also kind of like stealth training based on how you're asking questions. But I find myself actually marrying, you know, all the things that I've learned at CPSI over the years with polarity. I find myself, for the group of people that I work with in R&D, these scientists, when you talk about structure and flexibility and talk about what's so great about structure and where can they build in a little bit of flexibility, they're willing to move a little bit in there and move from that direction because they don't want to lose the structure. The process is how they were successful all those years. The process is what drives their paycheck. So they don't want to give that up. And so you have to show that they're not giving it up. It's not a either or, that it's a yes and.
I just want to say, I think it's a matter of, and Sarah, you and Claire have both described this so beautifully. You meet people where they are before you ask them to go someplace else. And then I think the other thing that I know is true of foresight and all of the processes that we talk about is that while I may have a preference, I have access to all of it. So just taking the time to help me relate back to those times when I have been an ideator, even if it was how to get on vacation from one point to the other, then at least I can refamiliarize somebody with that step and then ask them to relate that to their work somehow, you know. But I think there's a developer's version of the foresight explanation or a clarifier's version of the foresight explanation. You've taught us so well about that along the way. You know, but it really is about the entry into their world before you ask them to step out of it.
It's like praise first. You want to align with their thinking before you try to drag them into your thinking. Because if you can align with their thinking and show that you see the value of it, they think, okay, this is a person that I can have a conversation with. I think.
I would just like to add, and I thought Liz's comments were great, but I was thinking about, knowing the culture before you go in, that they're not always the same. And we've seen people in organizations come in, say, well, I did this at General Electric. Well, this isn't GE, this is somewhere else. I think also getting to know the people and developing relationships before you present your idea. It's not the time to now become buddy-buddy because you need something, because people see right through that. And to do that because it's the right thing to do, not that you're going to ask them for something in the future. And I think the other part, I was working with a cancer institute in the Boston area, and their mission and vision was to cure cancer, AIDS, and related diseases, which is a pretty amazing culture. But starting at that level, getting everybody to embrace the vision, and just so that everybody's on the same page, because every single person there was dealing with cancer, with patients and research and all of that. And then the other thing somebody mentioned before about peer coaching or coaching, and I would just add the peer coaching side, finding people in the organization who have been successful, who have actually sold ideas. What did you do? How did you do it? I'm new. What recommendations do you have in dealing with R&D and dealing with this group, with the surgeons, the radiologists, or whatever it might be? Not feeling that you have to solve all of it yourself, but going to local experts and asking for help, I think gives people a major advantage that's often lost, even though it's right there in front of us.
Absolutely.
Sarah, first of all, I want to just thank you. It's Joette, and it's just delightful because you are almost an insurance policy for me, and that your delivery system is beautiful, and it really helps me out because you are already leveling the playing field. You're very open and accepting, so that's number one. Number two, using the foresight assessment in the grad course in leadership and innovation that I'm teaching has been almost like this miracle worker for me, because they're coming in, and I have a lot of medical professionals coming in, and it's like, it's not a fighting game anymore. And they realize that it's not their job to get their team to be all the same. So when we talked about the differences, they're going, oh, is that why that person's such a pain in the neck? They're constantly clarifying, and we have an implementer is the supervisor who's in my class. So it has really made the team, give them permission to find out who they are, appreciate who they are, and not try to make little clones of who they are, but rather use all the different parts of the team to make it a very much more successful team. So thank you. It's been awesome.
Wow, well, thank you. I am certainly one of many people who have helped build this system, including the people who are using it and offering feedback back to us. So it's really wonderful to be part of that and to be trying to bring creative problem solving in the world, not as ideators trying to shove it down everyone's throat saying, see, we really got these good ideas, like, but as a really inclusive system that everybody sees themselves in and everybody contributes something important to. And really that's, I think that's our highest calling, to be inclusive as problem solvers, even though emotionally we're like, why is that person beating me up? Or why don't they get my enthusiasm? Or why aren't they buying the thing I'm trying to sell in the way I'm trying to sell it? Like it's just I think it makes all of us stretch in a way that's allows us to embrace each other a little better, which is probably a good thing. Any other comments? Because officially that is the end of my program, and I have totally loved that I got to sneak in and do a presentation. Thank you so much, Beth, and thank Missy for me that we got to do this and share this research and bring it to light, especially with a group of people who really has lived it in a way that has been great for me. I really appreciate it.
Sarah, we cannot thank you enough. This was awesome. I know a lot of people in chat were like, so how do I do this? So I am going to plug, if you're interested in more about learning about the process, the Creative Education Foundation does offer foundations in creative problem solving, where you get your foresight preference and a whole lot more.
Yes, they do.
So we can't wait to have you join us in the fall. It is virtual. It's 2 hours a day, 2 days a week for 4 weeks or something like that, if my math is right. Mike is the math person, and that's information that I'm not pulling off the top of my head, quite honestly. If you've loved today, which you had to have because it has been so freaking awesome, know that tomorrow is going to be along the same lines of fantastic. We've got Powering Up Creativity with metaphors and the fantastic Liz Monroe Cook. You can look over at her. She is on the screen. Wild Insight is our coffee hour with Melissa Miller. From Another World, what being an alien can teach you about empathy with Marta Villanova. And tomorrow night's social event, Pairings and Preferences. Now that you know about preferences, find out what that means with your beverage choice. I will have a glass in my hand and pajamas on my bod. So I want you to know that it's like very fancy. Wear your nicest pajamas and your comfiest of slippers. But other than that, thank you all so much for joining us. I am going to stop recording. So again, had the